いや残業でね女房に頼まれてたんですよ。
ええ、うちの人急にあれ食べたいこれ食べたいって言うでしょ。
僕アイスクリーム、私スラーピ
お風呂帰りは喉が渇いて。
ー。久しぶりにデートです。外で食べるよりはうちで食べたいって。
セブンイレブンなら夜11時まで。
セブンイレブンいい気分。
朝は7時からお食事もどうぞ。
空いててよかった。
So, American convenience stores suck. We know that, right? Like most of them, not Wawa. But they really suck, especially compared to Japanese ones. But I'm sure you've heard about this before. Even if you're not from America, I'm sure you've heard before about how like amazing Japanese convenience stores are and how the food is really delicious and they're just, well, good. So 7-Eleven, Family Mart, and Lawson are considered the three titans of convenience stores here in Japan. They're the three big boys. There's others, but not as big as these. And convenience stores are basically on every street corner in Japan, at least Tokyo. But even in rural areas, there's convenience stores. They're everywhere. So my name is Allison, and today we are going to explore how 7-Eleven became the king of Japan and why it's so good. Yes, 7-Eleven is above Family Mart and Lawson in number of stores. And a lot of Japanese people say 7-Eleven is the best. So the development around 7-Eleven, Lawson, Family Mart into becoming these like mega chains in Japan, they're all pretty similar. Like if one store introduced colored printers, then they all had to. So let's talk about 7-Eleven. First, a history lesson. So 7-Eleven is an American brand, as a lot of us know, that started almost 100 years ago now. It started off as an ice block distributor in 1927 called Southland Ice Company. And this Texas-based company increased the variety of things it sold over the years, had an interesting name change to Totem. And then in 1946, the chain finally adopted the name 7-Eleven. The name was a way to advertise its operating hours from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., which were very rare at the time, and still are today, actually. And from there, the store began to expand across America. From 1963, some stores did start to remain open 24 hours a day, but the name remains. Then, in 1964, 7-Eleven started to franchise. So 7-Eleven would make its Japan debut in 1974, with the opening of the first store in Toyosu. I know what you're thinking. What's Toyosu? Why would you choose Toyosu? We'll get there. And this happened after the Japanese company Ito-Yokado bought the rights to it in 1973. However, when Ito-Yokado first acquired 7-Eleven, many people within the company were actually very against it and doubted that the idea of a convenience store would work. They didn't see potential for it to grow and be successful in the Japanese market. And thank God those guys did not have their way, or we'd have no 7-Eleven. What a nightmare. So the location for the first store in Toyosu was an interesting choice. You might know of Toyosu because it has Team Labs planets in it, and that's kind of about it. There's also a mall, but like for tourists, not much, other than Team Labs, which is great. But back then, Toyosu had like basically nothing. It didn't even have a station. There was no train line for 2.5 kilometers from the location of the store, and the surrounding area was basically working class families and the factories that they worked at. So the only reason this area, this location was chosen was simply because the first person who applied for the franchise happened to be a liquor store owner in the area who thought it was time to rebrand. That's it. No one else wanted to take the risk. But they continued franchising. The first 24-hour store would soon open in Fukushima in 1975. So the reason convenience stores 7-Eleven were successful in Japan, especially in the Showa area, was because Japanese salarymen worked really hard and long hours back then. Even compared to now, they were like insane hours. In many cases, they would literally be there all night at the company. Hey, Japan was on its way to the bubble era, so sacrifices had to be made, and they made them. But this gave cities especially a really good market for people who would want to go to convenience stores. Desperate and sad salarymen. So by 1980, already 1,000 stores had opened up across Japan. And remember, its first store just opened 5 years earlier. So in 5 years, it spread from 1 to 1,000. We're only going up. In Japan. Back in America, however, Southland, the company that owns 7-Eleven in America, had a financial crisis and mishap after the next. Tons of failures in the 80s and the 90s. And eventually, it ended up with Ito-Yokado, the Japanese owner, having over 70% of the stock and of course the rights for the Japanese license. I think you see where this is going. So in 2005, Southland, which had been rebranded into 7-Eleven Incorporated a few years earlier, was swallowed up by 7&I Holdings, which is Ito Yokado. And Ito Yokado basically made 7&I Holdings just for 7-Eleven to own the 7-Elevens. If you go around Japan now and you look at 7-Elevens, a lot of them actually say 7&I Holdings on them, so look closely. So that's the history and how we got to where we are today. But how did it start and how did it spread beyond just the number of stores and all that? So I'm now going to talk about the developments, the products they've made, how 7-Eleven became the king. They just kept increasing their convenience-ness. And now I could not imagine life in Japan without it. So I'm not going to mention every single one, so I picked some of my favorites. So the first one is probably the most important and recognizable. So today, convenience stores in Japan are famous for a few things, and one of those is definitely onigiri, rice balls. I'm sure you've had one from a convenience store if you've been to Japan before. So when 7-Eleven first started selling rice balls in 1978, onigiri were considered to be a food you only made at home. It wasn't something you'd go out and buy. But because 7-Eleven's innovative packaging allowed them to sell onigiri with crispy seaweed on the outside, since the seaweed doesn't actually touch the rice until the moment you open the package, it was really different to homemade onigiri, and in a lot of ways it was better for like salarymen eating lunch and things. Honestly, I prefer 7-Eleven onigiri compared to homemade ones usually. So next, in 1981, customers began to be able to receive and send packages from the convenience store.
おじさんもセブンイレブンへ持っていけばいいのにね。
小さなお荷物はお近くのセブンイレブンへ。セブンイレブンいい気分。
No need to go to the post office or something now. Then 1987, the ability to pay bills was introduced. So it first started with Tokyo Electricity allowing their bills to be paid at 7-Elevens by attaching a barcode to the bottom of it.
ガス料金がセブンイレブンで払えるようになりました。
いらっしゃいませ。
And before this, you had to go to like a bank or something to pay, and it was really inconvenient. If I had to go to the bank to pay my bills now, I would simply never pay them. And since then, it's basically expanded to being able to pay almost anything at a convenience store, from your gas bill to paying for an Amazon package to concert tickets to just anything. And then in 1996, color printers were introduced, and you also began to be able to buy things like concert tickets or even video games you could reserve to get at the convenience store.
ゲームも予約受付中。
And then in 2001, 7-Eleven introduced 24/7 ATMs. I will give credit to another store for actually doing this a few years prior first, but this revolutionized banking in Japan. I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying that. And back then, and now even, banks were certainly not 24 hours. Their hours were like 9 to 3 or 2. And even ATMs were not 24 hours. They had like hours. So if you ran out of cash at like 10 p.m., you were out of luck. And actually a lot of ATMs still aren't 24/7, which I genuinely cannot understand. But anyway, so in 2001, 7-Eleven introduced their own food products, like an original brand. So 7-Eleven had always sold like bento, onigiri, etc. But this was the first one that claimed it did not use preservatives or artificial food dye, promising healthier options to consumers. So in 2007, 7-Eleven introduced their own private brand of food products. This time not like ready-made things like bentos, but more like shelf things, like iced coffee, chips, yogurt, cookies, etc. And their design looks really dated to me, even taking 2007 into consideration. Somehow it took them until 2013 to come out with their in-store coffee machines, which I can't imagine life without either. I can't believe how recent of an introduction this actually was. If you have not tried convenience store coffee, I would try it just to see how shockingly good it is for like being sold in a convenience store. And then we're here today. So as of 2022, Japan has over 21,000 7-Elevens nationwide, making it the most common convenience store in Japan, followed by Family Mart with over 16,000 and then Lawson with over 13,000. So these are the three indisputable kings. If your favorite is not on here, that's fine, but like every other chain only has like 2,000 stores, so So convenience stores are popular across the board. We know, because they're convenient. But what makes 7-Eleven special? Why is 7-Eleven so popular? Now you've probably already thought of a few reasons. Some are obvious, but let's explore some more. So I've done some research. I've looked at interviews with CEOs, online articles, popularity rankings, etc. in Japanese, and I'm going to compile those results into 3 reasons. 3 main ones. There's definitely more, but I like the number 3, and I've chosen 3 that maybe aren't as obvious. So number 1, they really aim to have their stores in good locations. So it's difficult for any 7-Eleven store to make low profit. This makes sense because when I lived in Gifu in an Inaka town with like 30,000 people, there were no 7-Elevens. There were only Family Marts and Lawson's. I guess because the location sucked. Fair. But good locations equals more customers, equals more money. And this is proven because in 2018, it was reported that 7-Eleven had an average of 1,054 customers per day, while Lawson, on the other hand, had only 819. Since 7-Eleven started expanding pretty rapidly very early on, I think they were able to secure some more prime locations and get a devoted customer base early on. And once someone has a usual convenience store, they're gonna keep going to it probably. And because there's so many locations, there's a way higher chance your usual is going to be a 7-Eleven. 2, they introduce products in a smart way. So when 7-Eleven first introduced their coffee machines into stores, they sold coffee for only 100 yen, about $1. This was their smallest size. Comparatively, Lawson sold their smallest size for 195 yen, while Family Mart's was 120. So customers want what's cheapest, and they're gonna think it's the best because honestly, all the coffee kind of tastes similar. Also, when 7-Eleven did first roll out their coffee machines, they did it all at once. While the other 2 chains, Lawson and Family Mart, instead chose to wait and see how the machines were doing before they continue to expand. So what does this do? This means that 7-Eleven has asserted their presence as the convenience store with coffee. It also gives customers an impression that the 7-Eleven coffee must be good and selling well, and therefore popular, because the machines were everywhere all of a sudden, all at once, compared to Lawson and Family Mart. Number 3, the brand is good. Of course, the name 7-Eleven is brand power in and of itself. But what I really mean here are the things I mentioned a bit earlier, the company's private brand products. So in a 2014 interview, the chairman, who both established 7-Eleven in 1973 and 7 & I Holdings in 2005, so he's been around forever, he stated that private brands were at the core of 7-Eleven's growth strategy. And this was a really hard, unique challenge for them to overcome. To get the consumer to prefer the generic 7-Eleven brand over already well-known name brand thing. Like, you know, the milk brand they've been buying from also the grocery store for like the past 40 years. How do you get a consumer to want the generic looking thing? And like in America, these generic products were viewed as inferior, even if they were sold cheaper, which they were. So 7-Eleven has several different lines actually of their branding, namely 7 Premium, which both have either the same or better quality as like national brand items. By that I mean like brands you can buy in the grocery store for more reasonable prices. And consumers thought it too once they tried it. 7-Eleven's profit on these items is actually about 3 times more than competitors' private brands, Family Mart, Lawson. And 7-Eleven's 7 Gold brand is where they really shine. And they promise really high quality products in this line, even if they actually cost more money than the already well-known grocery store brands. For example, one of their hit items, Kin no shokupan, like bread, it cost 250 yen in 2014, which was 50% higher than the grocery store brand's price point. However, it sold twice as much. So it worked, they did it. So yeah, 7-Eleven is king, but you know what the best convenience store really is? It's the one closest to you. That's why Family Mart is my favorite, because it's the closest. So anyways, let me know down below what you think about this, what you've learned, and if you think there are any other reasons I did not mention in this video. I couldn't mention all of them. Let me know why you think 7-Eleven is so popular, but also why convenience stores in general are, and let me know how they are in your country too. I only know American ones, which scare me, and I don't want to go in them ever. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like the video, comment down below, let me know. See you guys back here again next week as always. Bye!
7-Elevenいい気分